Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security to defend Israel. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers. Thank you to all of our supporters for tuning into this briefing. It's a great privilege to be joined today by the head of IDSF Research, or Yissachar, or thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Or you are no strangers to these briefings, and every time you join us, immediately thereafter, people say, okay, when are you bringing him back? So I'm so glad amidst your very busy schedule of
Glad to hear that.
speaking, of all the research that you are doing, you can join us. You really stay at the cutting edge of what is happening in this war. So let's start with the big question. Can Iran sustain a war with Israel?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think first we need to ask ourselves what drives Iran and why does it want war with Israel? And I think let's start with this very practical question. Why should Iran be involved in war with Israel? Um, I think Iran definitely positioned itself as the number one nemesis of Israel in the Middle East. And then it created a network of proxies to that effect. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is basically an Iranian army staged right across the street from all the border towns in Israel, right in the north, instead of being 2,000 kilometers far. So you can actually see, and I met someone this week from Kiryat Shmona, an Israeli town in the north, who showed me pictures that he took of Hezbollah people that he took from his backyard, Hezbollah soldiers just patrolling along the border. This is very significant foothold in right across Israel's border. Next, you have Hamas, of course, that is not an Iranian proxy per se, but is heavily supported by Iran, trained and equipped by them. And they mix it with their own internal Palestinian interests. And they were able to carry out the deadliest attack in Israel's history by having 3,000 terrorists just marching on foot, right? With machine guns and RPGs and just like firearms and 4-on-4s. Basically, that's it. Um, and then you have Syria and Bashar al-Assad's regime. You have the Houthis in Yemen that actually impact the global navigation routes. So all these things, and of course, not to mention Africa, South America, the Far East, Iran has built really an empire of proxies. Big question. All these proxies, do they have what some refer to as well, can they operate alone? And to be put differently put, do they have operational sovereignty? Okay. So in other words, can Hezbollah just decide to start firing rockets at Israel? Right. I think Hezbollah can definitely hit Israel hard. It will definitely not do it without the green light from Iran. Israel can hit Hezbollah harder. It can utterly destroy Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. It can heavily harm its abilities in Beirut. The big question we can ask ourselves today is, will Hezbollah fire? Will Iran fire? Will they start a war, like an all-out war, as opposed to the 10 months of attrition? They actually quite enjoy this attrition. Hezbollah say outright, especially with the Ibrahim El-Amin, the editor of Al-Akhbar News, the paper in Lebanon, who says attrition is our most hurtful weapon. That's what Hezbollah says. That's what Nasrallah says. And I don't think they're going to do it without the green light from Iran. And then next question, which you said, can Iran sustain this war should it decide to activate fully the Hezbollah proxy, and should it decide to fire itself like they did on April 14, firing more than 300 missiles and drones at Israel? I think I think we need to see what Iran is doing. Iran is not starting a war right now. Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated, what, 3 weeks ago? Nothing. A lot of drums, a lot of big threats. Khamenei vowing revenge when the blood was hot, was boiling. Nasrallah vowing revenge. All Iranian generals and state officials vowing revenge. And they say they would make Vadeh Sadiq, or the true promise, the way they called April 14, to look like, a walk in the park. And they're not doing anything. So I'm guessing that they are simply considering their spectrum of possibilities. Okay. I think they may be aware of the fact that they are going to have a hard time sustaining war with Israel. That's why they're not attacking. Think about it. We have a deterrence equation, right? Iran is attacking, Israel retaliates. Can they survive Israeli retaliation? Will the United States join an Israeli war against Iran? Can Iran sustain a US attack on its soil? All these questions are resting, I'm assuming, rest right on the desk of the supreme leader. I think Iran, the regime can sustain this war, but I think the abilities in terms of nuclear program, missile program, drone program, all these things will be very heavily hit. And it simply adds to the equation of deterrence. So look, in my opinion, I think Iran will survive it. The regime will survive it. It's not a small country like Israel. It's like the size of half of Europe. It's a huge country. But then in terms of abilities, they are having a serious debate because they know Israel and the US can bring them back a decade backwards in terms of destroying their capabilities. And I think they're not interested that I think further than that, I'll go one step further. I think they're enjoying the waiting time. And we're already seeing leaks in all sorts of Telegram channels and media outlets, leaks that actually waiting is part of the strategy. Making the Israelis stress is part of the strategy. Making the whole region be in uncertainty is part of the strategy. They have a 1,000-year vision to destroy Israel, to take over the Middle East, to face the big Satan, the United States, head on. Face the West head on. That's a big strategy. It doesn't have to happen this week. It doesn't have to happen in a month. It doesn't have to happen in a year. It will happen, inshallah, sometimes with enough hope. So that's their big strategic plan. And I think right now they enjoy being patient. They call it one strategic patience, making the region wait. That's really their strategy right now.
Now, obviously, Israel has a pressing issue with the north and 30,000 something residents not able to go to their homes. So something needs to be resolved with Hezbollah. But in terms of the timing with Israel and Iran, whose benefit is it to delay things? You're saying Iran has this 1,000-year vision. What about Israel? Israel, if Israel went into an all-scale direct war with Iran, there would also be a lot of fatigue for Israel, having just come out of Gaza. So putting Hezbollah on the side, is it in Israel's best interest to delay things with Iran?
I think it's in Israel's best interest simply because it gives it the possibility to act first. Okay, so you got this hourglass where Iran said, we're going to attack. And then Israel is in a waiting period. We already see the military telling, reservists not to go on vacation, be on alert, be vigilant. That affects the economy, that affects the military's attention span. But in parallel, we also continue doing the work in Gaza. There is an operation going on in Khan Yunis right now, a very big operation. Some operations in the center. All these things are happening in Gaza, regardless of what Iran is doing or is not doing. So the military is able to split its attention. I'm reminding you that the big story is Iran and Hezbollah. So in case Hezbollah starts an attack, that's a whole different ballgame for Israel, a whole, different war. War with Hezbollah means the entire state of Israel is, in a state of preparation to rockets, to siren alerts. Much of the economic activity has to adapt. I don't think stall because people can work from home today and all these things, but the economy will definitely be impacted, tourism, business, but also I think the readiness of the home front. Hundreds of thousands will be called. It will change. But the thing is that Israel has to make a choice right now. I think Israel, what you asked me, it is in Israel's benefit to wait this waiting period, to calculate its moves, maybe to rearm, maybe to wait for the opportune moment. And I think the party that strikes first is the party who gets to win. It's classic, even from Sun Tzu, Chinese strategic military theory, right from those days, right? If you strike first, you win. And then this waiting time gives Israel a window of opportunity to actually strike first. I hope that's what we choose.
Now, or you have shared with our audience a number of times that you don't view what we're in right now as an Israel-Hamas war, but it's really the Israel-Iran war. So I'm curious, Iran is the head of the octopus, so to speak. Is their foothold eroding? Is some of their prestige and power in the region eroding because they haven't been more aggressive against Israel? Meaning you know Arab culture, you understand Iranian culture. Are they losing regional dominance or power because they're taking this long game?
Well, let's put it this way. They are looking for a ladder off the ledge. They will definitely lose their prestige if they do nothing. Okay. It's a matter of dignity. It's a culture based on dignity and not on rights. In the West, we are used to think about what's my right? What do I gain from all this? What's in it for me? And in the East, it's mostly about, do I get to keep my word? Okay. It's okay that I signed a contract, but was there a handshake? Was there any dignity involved in that? So I think in the East, we're used to think about things a little differently. If you threaten in the West, when the United States threatened to attack Iran, all options are on the table, and then you go sign a nuclear deal, it's a reasonable diplomatic move. I think this deal was horrible and historically disastrous. It legitimizes Iran's right to develop nuclear weapons. But in the Western culture, you resort to diplomatic means. In the Eastern culture, if you didn't make good on your threat, in brackets, you're not a man, right? You didn't keep up to your word. And then you ask the question, if Iran chooses to not to withhold, what Iran said is that we actually give a chance to diplomacy, what they're not used to be doing, under the condition that there will be a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, we in the IDSF, we always say ceasefire in Gaza is just a euphemism. It's a code name for an act of surrender to Israel. What does ceasefire mean? It means answering to all of Hamas's claims, leave the Philadelphia route, leave the Netzarim corridor, basically legitimize Hamas rule in Gaza. If all that happens, then Israel loses the war, and Iran says, look, thanks to me, Israel lost the war, Hamas stays in Gaza, we save the Palestinian people, good for us. That's the route off the ledge that Iran is looking for. So to leave this twilight zone is some sort of dignity. It cannot do nothing. Right now, in Hebrew we say they climbed a very high tree. They sort of made all sorts of threats, and now they're looking for means off of the ledge. But I don't see any scenario that Iran is not doing anything. It might activate Hezbollah. It might pressure to reach a ceasefire. It might use somebody else's achievement as an Iranian achievement, or it strikes like some news strike Israeli targets or Jewish targets abroad. All these things are optional. So let's see what we get.
Now, recently it was publicized that Iran and Russia are building up their relationship, with Russian forces being trained partially in Iran to operate Iranian missiles. Well, what can you tell us about this growing alliance?
So I think Russia is a very different position right now than before October 7. I would even go as far as to say that Russia is involved in this war, maybe not, directly militarily against Israel, but Russia is involved in supporting Iran. And given that it's an Israel-Iran war, as we always say, that is the Israel-Iran war, not the Israel-Hamas war. Russia supports Iran. Russia is involved, period. So they invited Hamas delegation to Moscow to discuss. They enjoy discussing with all parties, but they didn't invite an Israeli delegation. Once they used to do that. Once Gadi Eisenkot, the chief of staff of the military, landed in Moscow, went to see Russian officials. He left, then the plane of Hezbollah and Hamas people arrived. So they enjoy this position, right? They're not doing this anymore. They pushed hard to one side and they pick this side because it all became political. It all became divisive. And Russia basically says that if this is a war of Israel against Iran, and Israel is a so-called American puppet, so necessarily we're going to be against Israel, against the US, and support Iran. Then we got the Iran-Russia axis, where Iran is actively involved in Ukraine, supplying Russia with drones. Many of the drones who are landing in the suicide drones today who crash in Kyiv, in Odessa, in Mariupol, are Iranian drones. right? So Ukrainians know all about suffering from Iranian drones. And then you got ground-to-ground missiles provided to Iran by Russia, a whole factory of $1 billion factory, basically, that is constructed by Iran inside Russia to manufacture drones and missiles. It's unbelievable. So I think Russia right now understood that it has an opportunity to be involved in this war. And if you noticed, we live in a time of day and age where we live in a new Cold War. So right when the drums hit and right when General Michael Kurilla, four-star general, commander of U.S. CENTCOM, Central Command, well, right when Kurilla is visiting Israel to discuss with the Chief of Staff, the military, with the Minister of Defense Gallant, right in the same evening, the chief of the Russian Council of National Security is in Moscow. The Russian head of National Security Council is in Tehran, meeting his Iranian counterpart. So all these things, I think they're done deliberately. Russia sort of rubs it to the US, shows it how much it is an influential power in the region, and each party is clashing for, striving for its sphere of influence. So in case of an Iranian attack, I can definitely see Russia heavily involved. There are cargo planes in and out of Tehran all the time. That's what they report in the news. I don't know if it's true, but definitely diplomatic, like shuttle diplomacy with senior officials. Let's see where this leads us.
And are you able to comment about the state of Russian-Israeli relations during this war? Have they deteriorated because of all of that, or Russia's kind of playing both sides of the equation?
No, they definitely deteriorated, and Russia stopped playing both sidism. As I said, it used to play both sides, having relations with Israel and coordinating, flights above the Syrian sky, and the supreme leader visiting Tehran and having, the Putin visits Tehran to have a very warm meeting with the supreme leader, and then organizing conferences with Iran and China, like Xi Jinping, Putin, and Raisi when he was alive, the Iranian president. And in parallel, you got Netanyahu visiting over the head of the U.S. National Security Council and the Russian National Security Council. We all have this great meeting in Israel to talk about global unity and global security. These days are over. Okay, right now, Russia has picked side, pushed hard toward one side. And I think if you look at this war, definitely voting against Israel, the UN, talking about how it's concerned about Israelis hitting and causing the killing of innocent civilians, right? Just for us to realize that Russia, of all countries, is concerned about civilian casualties. It is refusing to condemn Hamas, even inviting over Hamas delegations, actively and vocally supporting Iran. I think it's very fair to say that Russia has picked its side in this war.
Thank you, Oren. I want to thank all of our viewers who are sending in questions in the chat in our Zoom or sending them to my phone, to my email. It's great to have everyone really engaged in these briefings, and especially the people who watch the replay on YouTube, who subscribe to the channel, really share those videos, help us get the word out there. It's fantastic. You don't just do research, but you are very active in promoting Israel and presenting that research, and you very often engage with foreign diplomats. I'm curious to know, since October 7th till now, have you seen an increase of support with these foreign diplomats you engage with? Are there critical issues that they just can't wrap their head around? Like, what are the big issues that you feel necessary to talk to the foreign diplomats about?
I think the framing of this conflict is critical. I think there is a big gap between the way Israelis see things and then these diplomats see things. We had several diplomat briefings with the IDSF. I went several times to Europe. I also went to the European Parliament in Brussels, talked to representatives, right, left, and center. We talk to embassies all the time, and we are heavy consumers of media. We give multiple media appearances every month. I personally give interviews in English and in French many times, and for Exile Iranian TV, like Iran International, BBC Persian. We do all sorts of media outlets, and you can just see the same patterns of confusion. All the questions surround myths and mud and tomatoes that are thrown at Israel. And I think the big reason, for example, that they claim that there's genocide in Gaza, that there is starvation in Gaza, that there is no safe place in Gaza, that Israel is occupying Gaza, all these myths that are simply reiterated and echoed in like a small echo chamber of people who think the same way and consume the same sources. And I had this radio interview last week and I said, you know that you're accusing me of causing the death of 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza. Where do you get the number from? So it's Hamas numbers. These are Gaza health authorities that are basically figures provided by Hamas to you, and you willfully and happily, quote unquote, swallow these figures. So, well, we don't have another number. I said, okay, let me ask you this. Would you echo Russian disinformation because you had no other number about the war in Ukraine, about their whatever economic status? Well, there's this distinct, personally customized standard for Israel and another standard for the rest of the world. I think the reason why even the French president and the UN Secretary General rushed to Twitter to condemn Israel from bombing a school, and after that, we realized 3 hours later, we realized that actually it was a school compound. No civilians were there, just like, let's say 17 or 25 Hamas militants. They never apologize. They never correct themselves. One of the members of European Parliament said that after the claim that Israel kills 500 people in a Gaza hospital, turned out not to be the case at all. Members of some of parties wanted to raise, a resolution condemning Israel. And then they wanted to, pull it back to avoid this kind of embarrassment. And she said, no. I want you to raise this resolution so we can all see how you guys vote. And I think some of these voices in the European Parliament are more reasonable, but then you see some successes like the resolutions against Hamas and all these things. But the narrative is shifting. The world is becoming tired when it comes to Israel. When it comes to Ukraine, you see people like Joseph Borrell, the foreign minister of the EU, say, no cost is too high at all costs. We need to secure victory. We cannot appease Putin. We're ready to send you any means you need, any logistical needs you need, any weapons you need, any financial support you need. No, I mean, there's no schedule. There's no a deadline. We are here till the end, till victory. I wish he said the same words about Israel. When it comes to Israel, starvation, genocide, no safe place in Gaza, all the talking points of all the talking heads are saying, and I'm suspecting that is the big gap. One of the representatives in the foreign representatives told me, you are losing the war of information. And I think it was absolutely right. I think Israel needs to do more to deliver this message that we are definitely not committing a genocide. It's a very bizarre way to commit a genocide, to order hundreds of thousands, even over 1 million people to move from war zone to safe zone, then provide them with 500 or 600 trucks of humanitarian aid per day. It's a very bizarre way to commit a genocide, quite unprecedented. I'll just say this. I think there is a really big gap between what's going on in the reality and what the world sees. The Israel-Iran war, I keep saying, the US administration doesn't really say it. The European Union doesn't really say it. The United Nations don't really say it. They keep referring to Gaza, 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 like the European Council resolution from the end of May, where they refer to the situation in the Middle East. Now, the Middle East has a lot of problems, hundreds of millions of people, 22 countries with multiple problems, and you got 12 articles on Israel and Gaza and how terrible things are, and two-state solution, and all the usual accusations. I'll just say this. We at the IDSF started a database. I think you all know it by far, called warinisrael.org. I'm sure Moshe will also send it to you later. We talked about it several times. It's a great database. I really recommend you send it to your loved ones, your family, to your friends. This is how you fight, fire with fire. They disseminate this information on us, and I think Israel doesn't do enough to streamline information. So we write articles, and we do this, and we do interviews, and we do that. But the database, how many rockets, how many Hamas senior commanders were killed, how many towns were evacuated, what happened on October 7, analysis, videos, all these things are incredibly important. We have to keep fighting the disinformation, even, with this, these lies are outspoken against Israel.
Or thank you for sharing that. And I did put in the Zoom chat the link to the War in Israel website. It's warinisrael.org. Easy to remember. It's loaded with data and it's loaded with truth, and people should visit it and they should share it. Or Yissachar, head of IDSF Research, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you to all of our viewers. Thank you to all of our supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you next week, Monday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.